Hello, I am Alena Torralba from AB ANI ID 124, and this is a presentation of my prototype pitches for my thesis paper entitled Toxic Mother Daughter Relationships Through the Lens of Filipino Daughters. The mother daughter relationship is one of the most formative bonds in human development because it shapes a daughter's emotional regulation, attachment style, self worth, and relational patterns later in life. Films and animations have long explored the complexities of mother daughter relationships, often highlighting themes of conflict, growth, and reconciliation. Portraying these narratives offers the audience both representation and opportunities for reflection. Animated works such as Coraline, Brave, Turning Red, and Tangled in particular make effective tools for raising awareness, fostering empathy, and initiating dialogue about sensitive family issues. When the mother daughter bond becomes unstable or dysfunctional, daughters are particularly vulnerable to long term psychological difficulties, such as anxiety, low self esteem, and identity struggles. Intergenerational trauma frequently emerges when unresolved conflict and unhealthy coping behaviors are passed from mothers to daughters. These cycles of generational trauma are intensified in collectivistic and family centered Asian cultures, including the Philippines, where values like filial piety, utang ng loob, and family reputation often pressure daughters to prioritize obedience and emotional caregiving. Such cultural expectations can normalize control, guilt, and emotional burdens, contributing to the stress, anxiety, and other psychological difficulties among Filipino daughters. Filipino family studies do discuss collectivism and intergenerational trauma dynamics, but they are often done in families as a whole, leaving a gap in mother daughter dynamics. A literature review by Denham et al. Recommended further studies on special cases to understand micro situations and the occurrence of toxicity among family members. As such, this study seeks to provide and analyze the accounts of Filipino daughters dealing with or currently recovering from dysfunctional mother-daughter dynamics, and also to propose the development of an animation as an intervention to raising awareness, fostering healing and self-recognition, and initiating dialogue. Emphatic interviews were conducted with 10 participants, 7 who were currently still dealing with toxic maternal relationships, and 3 who have dealt with it in the past. Dominant behaviors that they reported were characterized by emotional inconsistency and the desire for control, eggshell parenting, emotional unavailability and neglect, hypercriticism, and physical or verbal abuse. When asked for insights as to what they might think was the cause for their mother's behavior, participants significantly demonstrated empathy and sociological awareness. They would often trace their mother's behaviors back to their upbringings, which is usually with poverty, lack of education, strict religious upbringing, and having to be a breadwinner at a young age. The answers suggest a pattern where mothers project their own survival mechanisms onto their children. For example, participants with mothers who grew up in financial insecurity say that their mother equates good parenting with material provision or rigid control, failing to give attention to emotional growth. As a result of the participants' understanding, they tend to be more forgiving or tolerant of the treatment that they receive. When asked about their plans for the future, majority of them described having plans of distancing themselves without completely cutting off their mothers. They would also say that a resolution is welcome only if their mothers would be the one to approach. Participant Billy describes this as leaving the door open. The conflicts for majority of the participants were summarized as identity and independence. Usually, when the daughter's developing autonomy and identity begins to challenge her mother's expectations and the need for control. Three primary areas were observed: the policing of their appearance and femininity, the identities of queer participants, and the suppression of individuality, where some mothers would dismiss or override their daughter's choices, interests, or opinions. As for the effects and the treatments that participants experienced, There's a high prevalence of diagnosed or suspected mental health conditions, including major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, severe self image issues, and disorganized or avoidant attachment styles. For nearly all of the participants, animations and films served as a form of emotional release and validation. For some of them, the films helped in understanding the cycle of trauma, and for others, seeing these mother daughter narratives in films were a form of escapism and a fuel to hope that things would eventually change. All in all, this highlights the potential for narratives centered around mothers and daughters. The primary target audience for this animation output is the demographic similar to participants, which are young adults navigating identity formation and emancipation while still experiencing the immediate effects of toxic maternal dynamics. The animation also seeks to serve a secondary audience of younger daughters and of mothers. After the interviews, the underlying need was identified, as well as the how might we statement, which is how might we empower a daughter's growing need for self expression, individuality, and independence. And finally, the objectives for the prototypes. The study resulted in the creation of three prototypes: Ma, Para, ICU, and Tether. As a forward, these remain as loose ideas and any part of them may be changed during development. First is Ma, Para. The logline goes as follows: graduation is nearing and so is college. Christine must decide if her future belongs to her mother or herself. It has themes of growing up, slice of life, drama, identity versus obligation, academic trauma, and self acceptance. To explain the idea better, the animation starts with Christine, the persona and main character, preparing for senior high school graduation. All her life, Christine has followed the path that her mother has set for her, and in the summer before college, she goes through a lot of changes in her life, which is saying goodbye to friends, preparing to move for college, choosing a college course, and basically starting to choose your own path at this age. So she has to navigate through multiple conflicts, with the main one being her relationship with her mother. The title Ma Para is also a reference to para po, which is used in jeepneys to get off the ride. In this context, Ma Para is Christine asking the mother, who has been driving her entire life, to let her off the ride and journey on her own. Ma Para will use the narrative paradigm as a theoretical framework. This theory says that humans are fundamentally storytellers and that we evaluate the world based on good reasons. The prototype's primary function under this framework is to ensure narrative coherence, or that the story is believable, and narrative fidelity, in which the story has to reflect lived experiences of the target audience. For the persona, the main character Christine embodies the consequences of self censorship and conditional validation, some of the common characteristics among the participants. Her persona captures a daughter who successfully meets all external demands, only to realize that she has lost her internal self. Due to the transition to college and the loss of her high school environment, she faces a sudden realization that no one really likes her for who she is. Other than that, Christine is also a deeply suppressed artist who uses drawing and dreaming as her emotional outlet. Here is the initial design for the persona and main character, Christine, and some sketches for some scene ideas. The art style for Mapara is simple, characterized by textured lines, painterly backgrounds, and stylized characters. It's a balance of being safe to view for both children and adults. If possible, during the production, the coloring style for the backgrounds and characters will be in a watercolor style. The following pegs and references are for character design, background inspiration, and mood board for the story. The second prototype, ICU, has two logline variations. For logline 1, a college student who has learned to be invisible, must find the courage to express herself before she completely fades away. For logline 2, a teenage spirit attempts to communicate to her mother, who remains as the only one unable to see her. ICU will utilize the theoretical framework of narratology, and so far, the core of the narrative is the spirit metaphor, which represents the daughter's true unseen self, while the mother's inability to see her symbolizes her unwillingness to acknowledge the daughter's development and agency. The persona inspired by participants is Leah, a persona representing the self suppression evident in participants who felt unseen, particularly those dealing with emotional numbness, attachment issues, severe anxiety, and having a difficulty in opening up to others. For the first logline, Leah is a college student who has learned to be so compliant and emotionally withdrawn that it starts to come with a physical consequence. Her body begins to partially or completely fade into literal invisibility, and she needs to find a way to fix it. For the second logline, her physical body remains on a hospital bed as a symbol of the little girl that her mother is fixated on and cannot let go, while her spiritual self or her real self, the ghost, is the young adult that she is and she wants to be. The specifics for Leah's persona is still very flexible. The core idea is basically just representing the feeling of being unseen and dismissed in a fantasy way, hence the motif of ghosts, spirits, and invisibility. Here is the initial design for Leah, and another draft design in a different style, and a sketch for an idea of a scene. The art direction for ICU is characterized by more cartoonish characters and vibrant colors. The following pegs and references are for the character inspirations, background inspiration, and overall mood board. The third and last prototype is Tether with the log line. An imaginative young woman escapes into vivid dreams of self actualization. It's a more non narrative, abstract, and symbolic animation with themes of self acceptance, dreams, freedom, and escapism. The animation will utilize semiotics to construct the meaning embedded in the film's core visual metaphors. Tether will be a mix of abstract, dreamlike sequences portraying the feeling of freedom and the dreams and life that Maya desires. There are small cuts in the scenes that give hints to the ending, in which Maya is pulled back by the tether into the harsh reality. The central sign of the film is the tether or umbilical cord attached to the protagonist. Maya, the dreamer, is a persona based on participants who use imagination, escapism, and avoidance as their primary coping mechanisms. There is a mysterious red string that is attached to her navel, representing the maternal connection that keeps her physically and psychologically bound. And in her dreams, Maya also assumes a different form. Here is the initial design for Maya, along with some sketches for scene ideas. The art direction for Tether is inspired by animations with dreamlike aspects and realistic characters, such as Luton de Souffle, Paparia, and Paprika, which share characteristics of having vivid, unrealistic sequences. And the following pegs and references are the inspiration for Tether's look. So we have the character inspirations and the background inspiration and mood board. When the chosen prototype is developed into an animation, target distribution channels are all available social media. Official Benilde school pages will also be a target, as well as generally any other opportunities for distribution. That concludes this presentation and thank you for listening.